On your knees, rookie, there's no place for weak women in a SEAL unit. Laughter erupted around her as she obeyed, silent and still. They thought she was a frightened newcomer. None of them knew she was their newly appointed commanding officer, sent undercover to expose the unit's internal abuse. Beneath her collar, a hidden camera captured every word, every smirk. And as the live feed streamed to Naval Command, the men laughing now had already sealed their own court-martials. Her name was Olivia, but they knew her as June Hale. She knelt in the frost-covered dirt of the training yard, her breath visible in the midnight air. The cold bit into her knees, but she didn't flinch. Her plain fatigues hung loose, no makeup on her face, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. To them, she looked like nobody, another recruit who didn't belong. The men circled her, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. Acting Captain Dax Mercer stood at the front, arms crossed, his sharp jaw set in a smug grin. He was 38, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from years of being obeyed without question. His eyes scanned her, sizing her up, already dismissing her as weak. "Hey, June," Dax said, his voice loud enough for the whole team to hear. "You got anything to say for yourself, or are you just gonna kneel there like a lost puppy?" The men laughed again, their voices echoing off the barracks. She stayed silent, her hands steady on her thighs. Her eyes moved slowly, taking in every face, every sneer. She didn't need to speak yet. The camera was rolling. The special training had been Dax's idea, a midnight drill he called discipline check. The whole team was dragged out of their bunks, lined up in the dark, told to prove their loyalty. For the new recruits, it was worse. Dax had a ritual for them. Kneel in the cold, confess your weaknesses out loud, let the team judge you. Most recruits stammered through it, desperate to fit in. Olivia, as June knelt without a word. Her silence made them uneasy. Riker Sloan, a 29-year-old with a shaved head and a permanent scowl, stepped forward. He was the team's loudmouth, always looking for a chance to tear someone down to feel bigger. "What's wrong, Princess?" he said, leaning close. "You think you're too good to talk, or you just too dumb to know what to say?" He turned to the others, grinning, waiting for their laughter. The men tightened the circle instantly, not just surrounding her, but forming a tight claustrophobic ring that cut off the distant yellow light of the barracks. Dax gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod over June's head. On the periphery, two shadows, new recruits who were desperately trying to be accepted, pulled out a tripod and heavy tools. They were setting up a makeshift spotlight, the grinding metal sound of the fasteners cutting through the frost-heavy silence. Within seconds, a blinding stark white halogen beam flared to life, pointed directly at June's kneeling form. The sudden intense heat of the lamp was palpable even in the freezing air, and the light turned the scene into a stark, unforgiving spectacle, transforming the bullying into a public execution of spirit. The air was suddenly thick with the sharp metallic scent of ozone from the lamp and the bitter smell of frozen earth. The camera hidden beneath her collar adjusted perfectly to the intense light, capturing the cruel theatricality of their display. Ezra Black, 31, lanky with a smirk that never quite reached his eyes, pulled out a small handheld camera. He was the team's unofficial videographer, always recording jokes to share in their private group chat. "Smile June," he said, zooming in. "This one's going viral in the unit." The red light blinked as he panned across her face. Dax, seeing the perfect stillness in her eyes and the lack of a single flinch under the white light, realized simple mockery wasn't working. He stepped closer, planting his boot inches from her knee, and lowered his voice to a conspiratorial, chilling whisper that made the surrounding silence feel louder and more menacing. "We all know why you're here, June. The file mentioned your last post." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Don't pretend you don't remember that failed op in Djibouti. The one where you left Lieutenant Barnes hanging because you froze on the comms. That blood is on your hands, Hale. You're not just weak. You're a liability who costs lives. Now tell us what kind of SEAL lets their team die." He watched for the slightest tremor, trying to make her feel like a pariah who carried the guilt of a fictional failure, but she only gave the barest exhale of cold air. She didn't move, didn't blink. Her lips stayed closed, but her eyes locked on his for a second, just long enough to make him shift his weight. Finn Calder, the youngest at 27, hovered at the edge of the group. He was skinny, nervous, always trying to prove he belonged. Riker nudged him. "Go on, Calder. Tell her what we think of her." Finn hesitated, then muttered, "You don't belong here. You're just in the way." Olivia's fingers twitched, but she stayed still. The air was heavy, the kind of cold that made your bones ache. Nolan Hask, Dax's right-hand man, stepped up next. At 36, he was all muscle and menace, the guy who enforced Dax's rules with a quiet, brutal efficiency. "You're wasting our time, Hale," he said, his voice low. "Women like you don't make it in a place like this. You're soft. You're nothing." He spat on the ground near her knee, Nolan clearly seeking a stronger reaction than he received from his dismissive words, and the spittle took a large, heavy steel water canteen from his utility belt. He crouched down and began to scrape the metal bottom of the canteen, slowly and deliberately, across the frost-covered dirt just inches from her kneeling face, creating a high-pitched, grating metallic sound that seemed to vibrate through the frozen ground itself. He dragged the noise out agonizingly until the only sound in the yard was the horrible, drawn-out screech of steel on ice. He paused, allowing the extreme tension to build. Then, with a sudden, violent movement, he slammed the canteen down hard on the ground next to her thigh. The shockwave of the impact sent fine, icy dust and frozen pebbles spraying up across her face and the front of her fatigues, a clear act of physical degradation delivered with surgical cruelty. The team laughed again, but it was sharper now, meaner. Olivia tilted her head slightly, just enough to meet Nolan's eyes. "Is that all?" she asked, her voice calm, almost bored. The laughter stopped. Nolan's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. She held his gaze a moment longer, then looked back at the dirt. The team didn't know it, but Olivia had been raised in a world of power. Her family owned half the shipping industry on the East Coast, their name on buildings and charity galas. But she never wore it. No designer clothes, no flashy jewelry. She'd learned early to move through the world quietly to let people underestimate her. Her parents had drilled discipline into her self-controlled dignity restraint. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone, but that didn't stop people from judging her. Everywhere she went, they saw her plain clothes, her bare face, and assumed she was less important, less capable, less worthy. And now, kneeling in the dirt, she let them think it. Let them dig their own graves. Riker wasn't done. He circled her, his boots kicking up dust. "You know what you are," he said loud enough for the whole yard to hear. "You're the kind of girl who thinks she can play with the big boys, but you're just a joke, a little girl pretending to be a soldier." He laughed, looking around for approval. Ezra zoomed in again, chuckling. "This is gold," he said. Olivia's hand stayed steady, but her jaw tightened for a split second. She spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "You done talking?" Riker froze, his smirk, faltering. The team went quiet, waiting for his comeback. He didn't have one. She looked at him, her eyes steady, then turned her head back to the ground. Mace Thorne, the 40-year-old logistics officer, stood at the back, watching it all. He was older, quieter, with graying hair, and a face that gave nothing away. Mace was the fixer, the guy who made problems disappear before they reached the higher-ups. He didn't join in the taunting, but he didn't stop it either. He just stood there, arms crossed, his eyes flicking between Dax and Olivia. Something about her silence bothered him. He shifted his boots, scuffing the dirt. Olivia noticed. She always noticed. She'd been trained to read rooms to spot the weak links. Mace was careful, but not careful enough. The drill ended when Dax clapped his hands. "All right, enough fun," he said. "Hale, get up. You're embarrassing yourself." The team laughed one last time as she stood brushing the dirt off her knees. She didn't look at them, didn't give them the satisfaction. She just walked back to her bunk, her steps steady, her bag slung over one shoulder. The camera under her collar was still recording. Every word, every laugh, every insult, it was all there. And somewhere far from this frozen yard, Dr. Corin Valles, the team's frontline medic, was watching the feed. Corin was 45, sharp-eyed, with a no-nonsense way of moving through the world. She was the only one Olivia trusted, the only one who knew who she really was. Back in her bunk, Olivia sat on the edge of her cot, her hands folded. The barracks were quiet now, the team gone to their own beds. She pulled a small device from her pocket, checked the connection, and sent the night's footage to Corin. As Olivia settled her surveillance gear, she heard a faint, almost imperceptible scuff of a boot outside the thin plywood wall of her barracks. She instantly stopped checking the device, her body frozen on the cot, listening to the ambient silence of the sleeping unit. The slight sound was quickly and deliberately muffled, replaced by the normal settling noises of the wooden structure contracting in the cold. A minute later, A small, heavily folded square of paper was slid silently underneath her door, just barely wide enough to prevent it from snagging on the carpet. She waited 5 full heartbeats, counting the beats against the pulse in her throat, before retrieving it with the tip of her boot and unfolding it. The paper was blank, save for a single small fingerprint left in graphite, a highly specific non-military marking she recognized from a classified personnel file on Mace Thorne's prior Black Ops unit. It was a silent, unauthorized warning, confirming Mace was operating a parallel unknown agenda, and she was already on his radar. Then she leaned back, her eyes on the ceiling. Years ago, she'd sat in a different room, a mahogany-paneled office, her father's voice steady, as he told her what it meant to carry their name. "You don't show it?" He'd said, his hands folded on the desk. "You don't need to. It's in how you stand, how you listen. Let them talk. They'll tell you who they are." She'd been 16 then, her hair in a braid, her sneakers scuffed. She'd listened. And now, in this cold, dim barracks, she was listening again. The next week, Dax threw a team dinner. It was supposed to be a bonding thing, a way to welcome the new recruits. Olivia sat at the end of the table, her plate untouched. The room was loud, filled with clinking glasses and forced laughter. Dax stood at the head, raising a glass, his smile all charm. "To the team," he said. "The best of the best. Except maybe Hale over there." He winked and the room laughed. Olivia didn't react. She just picked up her water glass, took a sip, and set it down. Riker, sitting across from her, leaned forward. "What's the matter? June food? Not good enough for you?" He was louder now, playing to the crowd. "Or you just too shy to eat with us?" A woman walked in, Lila, a young aide from command, all sharp heels and sharper smiles. She was Dax's guest, someone he'd bragged about knowing. "Oh, is this the new girl?" Lila said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She looked Olivia up and down, taking in her plain fatigues, her bare face. "Honey, you need to step it up if you're gonna survive here." Lila, emboldened by Dax's approving gaze and the drunken chuckles of the surrounding team, decided to make her point physical. She reached across the crowded table, bypassing the cutlery, and snatched a handful of the greasy, lukewarm mashed potatoes from the common dish in the center. She then deliberately smeared the mess onto Olivia's pristine, empty plate, covering the single piece of speared meat June had managed to claim. "No, honey." Lila drawled, her eyes cold and condescending as they challenged Olivia. "This is what you're supposed to be eating, grit. Now swallow it. Or you're gonna cry about the caloric content and run back to mommy." The action was gross, childish, and calculated to destroy June's dignity, coating the food in a layer of public contempt. The potatoes dripped slowly off the fork, forming a yellow, oily puddle on the clean plastic plate. The table laughed again, louder this time. Olivia set her glass down, her movements slow. "I'm surviving just fine," she said, her voice even. Lila blinked, thrown off. The laughter died down. Olivia picked up her fork, speared a piece of meat, and ate it without looking at anyone. Riker wasn't letting it go. He stood up, holding a cup of something that smelled like old gym socks. "Time for a team challenge," he said, grinning. "Prove you're one of us, Hale. Drink this." He slid the cup across the table. The room went quiet, everyone watching. Riker didn't just slide the cup. He picked it up, held it directly over her head for a moment, and then leaned so close that his stale, aggressive breath ruffled the wisps of hair near her temples. "If you spill a single drop of this, Hale, you clean the entirety of the head and the latrine with a toothbrush for the next month," he hissed, making the threat immediate and physically onerous. The liquid inside wasn't just foul-smelling. It was visibly viscous and opaque, having been mixed with something dark and unsettling, perhaps stale coffee oil and mud from the yard. He then slowly lowered the cup until the rim was resting directly against her bottom lip, forcing her head back slightly, compelling her to either comply or violently reject the gesture. Olivia looked at the cup, then at Riker. "You first," she said. The words were soft, but they cut. Riker's grin faded. He laughed it off, but his hands shook as he sat down. Ezra, sitting nearby, pulled out his phone. "Gotta record this," he said, aiming the camera at her. Olivia didn't move. She just looked at him, her eyes steady until he lowered the phone. Mace walked in, during the silence, his face unreadable. He leaned over to Dax, whispered something about a call, something about covering it. Olivia caught the words, her hands still on the table. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a napkin, and wiped her mouth. As she did, a small piece of paper slipped out, landing on the table. It was old, creased with a string of numbers written in faint ink. Finn, sitting next to her, glanced at it. His eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. Olivia picked it up, folded it carefully, and slipped it back into her pocket. She knew he'd seen it. She'd wanted him to. Later that night, Finn slipped a tiny tracking device into her bag. He thought he was being sneaky, thought he was helping Riker catch her. Olivia had seen it coming. She'd left her bag unzipped, left it where he could reach it. She wanted him to feel like he was winning. The device picked up a conversation the next morning. Mace and Dax in the logistics room, their voices low. "Pack it up before dawn," Mace said. "Sign it and it's done." Olivia smiled to herself as she listened through her own hidden receiver. She sent the audio to Corin along with a photo of the paper she'd dropped at dinner. It was a code, a key to a locked crate in the supply shed. She waited until the team was asleep, then slipped out to the shed. The code worked. Inside the crate were files, fake reports, banned medical supplies, a list of names marked protected. Her hands moved fast, snapping photos, sending them to Corin and a contact at Naval Command. She locked the crate, slipped back to her bunk, and waited. As Olivia settled back into her cot, confirming the transfer to Naval Command was complete, the distinct and violent sound of a door being kicked open echoed from the far end of the barracks. It was Dax erupting in a blind, sudden rage. He started systematically going through the men's quarters, throwing open footlockers, ripping through bags and tearing mattresses, screaming incoherent threats about betrayal and the lack of brotherhood among the team. His voice was cracked with sudden, intense, unbridled fear, the sound of a man who knew he was exposed but couldn't locate the threat. He moved quickly down the row, tossing clothes and gear, until he stopped directly outside June's door, his heavy, ragged breathing audible through the thin wood. He placed his hand on the doorknob, turning it slowly and deliberately, pausing just before the latch released. Then he abruptly jerked his hand back, choosing instead to kick the wall next to the door with all his force before retreating, leaving a deep dent in the plywood and a lingering cloud of drywall dust in the air. The next day, Dax called a meeting. He was furious, his face red as he paced the room. "Someone's leaking," he said. "Someone's trying to tear this team apart." His eyes landed on Olivia. "Hale, you got anything to say?" She looked up, her face blank. "No, sir," she said. Riker jumped in, pointing at her. "It's her. She's the one screwing us over." The team murmured, nodding. Olivia didn't flinch. She just folded her hands and waited. Ezra pulled up a video on his laptop, an edited clip that made it look like Olivia was sneaking around stealing files. The team watched, their faces hard. Finn stood up, his voice shaky. "I saw her messing with stuff," he said. "She's not one of us." Olivia looked at him, her eyes steady. "You sure about that?" she asked. Finn looked away, his hands in his pockets. The room felt colder, the air thick with tension. Olivia stood, her movements slow, deliberate. She walked to the front of the room, plugged a drive into the projector, and hit play. The screen lit up with the unedited video, Dax and Mace talking about their deals. Ezra laughing as he spliced footage, Riker mocking her in the yard. The team went silent. Finn's face went pale. Dax lunged for the projector, but Olivia stepped in front of it. "It's already sent," she said, her voice calm. "Naval Command has it all." The room froze. Mace's jaw dropped, his hands clenching. Ezra tried to laugh it off, but it came out weak. "You set us up," he said, his voice shaking. Olivia didn't answer. She just looked at him, then turned and walked out. The team sat there stunned as the truth sank in. They'd been played. She wasn't just a recruit. She was something else. The next night, Dax tried one last move. He called the team to the training yard again, his voice sharp with desperation. Olivia stood in the center, her hands at her sides. "You think you're tough?" Dax said, shoving a rope into her hands. "Climb it, now, or you're out." The obstacle was rigged too high, too slick, meant to make her fail. The team watched, some smirking, some uneasy. Mace stepped forward, his voice low. "You talk to anyone outside Hale, and you're done. Not just here, everywhere." Olivia looked at him, her face calm. "You're sure about that?" she asked. She climbed the rope slow and steady, her hands steady despite the slickness. When she reached the top, she looked down at them, her eyes locking on Dax. Then she slid down, landed lightly, and walked away. Mace, seeing the final desperate challenge fail and knowing the digital fallout was imminent, took 2 rapid predatory steps towards Olivia's retreating figure. He caught her shoulder, spinning her around with more brute force than necessary, his fingers digging into the muscle. His usual calm facade was utterly shattered, replaced by a raw, frantic aggression that turned his face into a desperate mask. His eyes, usually cool and unreadable, were wide and glassy with dread. He didn't yell. He lowered his voice to a strained, guttural whisper that carried a profound, personal threat. There are 2 bodies buried in the desert that know your father's name, Quinn. Don't touch us. You have no idea who you are dealing with on this team, and Command won't protect you from what happens next if you push this. He held her gaze, waiting for any flicker of fear, any acknowledgement of a real personal danger far beyond a simple court-martial. But she merely blinked slowly, confirming she heard him. What they didn't know was the black box she'd hidden in the yard. It was small, tucked under a bench, recording everything. The feed went live, streaming to the internal network and straight to Naval Command. It caught Dax's threats, Mace's orders to destroy evidence, Ezra's nervous laughter as he filmed her climb. Finn stood at the edge, his face pale, his hands in his pockets. When the MPs arrived, led by a stone-faced officer, the yard went quiet. Dax tried to talk his way out, but the officer held up a tablet showing the live feed. "You're done," the officer said. Dax and Mace were cuffed, led away. Ezra tried to run, but an MP grabbed him. Finn just stood there staring at the ground. The final meeting was the worst. Dax in cuffs stood in front of the team, his voice shaking as he pointed at Olivia. "She's the liar," he shouted. "She's the one who betrayed us." A few team members nodded, their faces uncertain. Anonymous letters had been slipped under doors, calling Olivia a traitor, a fake. Finn stood at the back, his eyes on the floor. The room felt heavy, like it was about to snap. Olivia stood alone, her hands clasped her face, calm. The officer stepped forward, holding a folder. "Enough," he said. He turned to Olivia. "Captain Quinn, you have the floor." She stepped forward, her movements slow. She reached up, unclipped her hair, let it fall loose. She pulled off the name tag that read, "Hale," and dropped it on the table. "My name is Elara Quinn," she said, her voice steady. "I'm your commanding officer." The room went silent. She plugged her drive into the projector again, and the screen lit up with everything: contracts, lists, audio, video. Dax's face went white. Mace stared at the floor. Ezra tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Finn stepped forward, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know." Olivia looked at him, nodded once, then turned back to the screen. The fallout was quiet, but brutal. Dax and Mace were court-martialed, their careers over. Ezra was suspended, his reputation trashed when the videos leaked online. Riker lost his security clearance, his name blacklisted in every unit. Finn was given a chance to stay, but he'd have to prove himself. Olivia didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She just walked out of the meeting, her bag over her shoulder, her steps steady. The team watched her go, their faces a mix of shame and awe. She'd played them all not to win, but to clean house. The unit was rebuilt from the ground up. Olivia stayed on as commander, setting up new rules, cameras in common areas, anonymous reporting channels, regular check-ins with a psychologist. Finn stepped up, running a program to help soldiers talk about what they'd been through. Ezra was reassigned to a desk job, forced to log every piece of data he touched. The truth had done its work. Olivia didn't need to say much. Her presence was enough. She'd walked into that unit knowing they'd judge her, knowing they'd see her plain clothes, her quiet voice, and think she was nothing. She'd let them. She'd let them laugh, let them mock, let them think they'd won. And in the end, she'd shown them who she was, not with words, but with actions. The team would never be the same. Neither would she. For everyone who's ever been looked down on, who's felt the sting of being called, "Les, this is for you." You know what it's like to stand in a room where nobody sees you. You're not wrong for staying quiet. You're not alone in carrying that weight. The truth always comes out. Just keep walking. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.